Chapter 3 The Haunting Begins. The cabin's facade had always been unassuming, with its weathered logs and modest structure nestled among the trees. But as night fell, the tranquility of their getaway began to fray at the edges. The eerie atmosphere that had plagued their first night grew heavier, thick with a sense of impending dread. The events of the previous day had left a lingering unease among the group, and as darkness settled over the woods, the cabin itself seemed to exhale an anxious sigh. David, ever the skeptic, had brushed off the journal's disturbing entries as the product of a troubled mind, but even he couldn't ignore the unsettling phenomena that began to occur. Shadows danced along the walls in peculiar patterns, their movements too deliberate to be mere tricks of light. The beams of the old lanterns flickered and wavered, casting grotesque shapes that seemed to leer from the corners of the rooms. Emily, determined to keep spirits high, suggested they have a fun evening playing games and telling stories. "We need to shake off this negativity," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "Let's make the most of our time here." The group agreed, though their attempts at merriment fell flat. The games they played seemed to drag on, and the laughter that was meant to fill the room felt hollow. The tension was palpable, and every creak of the cabin seemed to amplify their anxiety. As the night deepened, the haunting presence that had begun to manifest became more pronounced. David was the first to experience something truly unsettling. While stepping outside to check on the fire pit, he noticed a figure standing at the edge of the woods. It was a dark, indistinct shape, barely visible against the darkness. David squinted, trying to make out any details, but the figure remained, shrouded in shadow. When he blinked, the shape was gone, leaving him with a cold shiver. Returning to the cabin, David tried to shake off the encounter, but his unease was evident. "I saw something out there," he told the group. His voice was taut with tension. "I figure at the edge of the woods. It was too dark to make out clearly, but I'm sure I saw something." Rachel's face paled. "You saw it too? I thought I was imagining things." Ethan, trying to stay rational, suggested they stay inside for the rest of the night. "Let's just keep the lights on and stay together. We can't let this get to us." The group settled in the living room, the flickering firelight casting long, quivering shadows. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety, each member of the group too unsettled to fully relax. They tried to distract themselves with conversation, but the cabin seemed to be working against them. The once comforting warmth of the fireplace now felt oppressive, and the shadows on the walls seemed to move with a will of their own. Rachel's distress grew with each passing hour. Her skin tingled with a sense of being watched, and every small sound seemed amplified. As if to confirm her fears, she began experiencing unsettling visions. Flickering glimpses of figures in the shadows, fleeting and indistinct, plagued her every time she closed her eyes. It felt as though the cabin was alive, breathing and watching. Desperate for answers and hoping to make contact with whatever was haunting them, Emily proposed a seance. She was convinced that communicating with the spirit might help them understand what was happening and possibly appease whatever presence lingered in the cabin. Ethan set up the seance in the dining room, arranging candles and placing a makeshift Ouija board on the table. The flickering candlelight created an eerie atmosphere, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. The group gathered around the table, their faces tense with a mix of hope and trepidation. "Is there anyone here with us?" Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly as she placed her fingers lightly on the planchette. The group sat in silence, their breaths shallow and eyes fixed on the board. The planchette remained still, and for a moment it seemed like nothing would happen. But then, as if stirred by an unseen force, the planchette began to move slowly across the board. The group's collective breath caught as the planchette spelled out a single word: help. Rachel's eyes widened with fear. "What does it want us to help with?" The planchette moved again, spelling out, "She is here." A chill swept through the room. The temperature seemed to drop abruptly, and the candle flames flickered wildly, as if caught in a draft. Rachel's eyes glazed over, her expression becoming vacant and distant. It was as if a different presence had taken hold of her. Rachel? Emily's voice was laced with concern. Are you okay? Rachel's head tilted at an unnatural angle, and her voice, when she spoke, was no longer her own. It was a hollow, echoing tone that seemed to reverberate with a chilling authority. She is here, the voice intoned. The one who was left behind, the one who seeks what was stolen. Emily's heart raced. What do you mean? What was stolen? The possessed Rachel's eyes, now dark and lifeless, locked onto Emily's. The family was not lost, she said. They were taken. The spirit was left to wander, bound by the pain of betrayal. A series of horrifying visions flashed before Rachel's eyes, each one more disturbing than the last. Emily, David, and Ethan watched in horror as Rachel's body convulsed, her face contorting in fear and agony. The room seemed to swirl with shadowy figures and fragmented scenes of violence and despair. The haunting visions revealed a tragic event, a family torn apart by madness and betrayal, their spirits bound to the cabin by a malevolent force. The ghostly presence sought to repeat the tragedy, to find a new vessel for its torment. As the seance ended, Rachel slumped forward, her body trembling as if awakening from a deep, nightmarish slumber. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she looked at her friends with a mix of fear and apology. I saw it, she said weakly. I saw everything. The family was torn apart by one of their own, driven mad by the spirit. It wants to repeat the tragedy, and it's been waiting for us. The room was silent, the weight of Rachel's revelations hanging heavy in the air. The group was left in a state of shock, the cabin's oppressive presence now more tangible than ever. The chilling realization that they were part of a cycle of torment sent waves of fear through them. Emily tried to maintain her composure. We need to find a way to end this, to break the cycle. We can't let it claim any more victims. The tension in the cabin reached a fever pitch. The once comforting walls now seemed to close in, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. The group knew they were no longer just dealing with a haunting. They were entangled in a tragic cycle of violence and despair that threatened to consume them all. As the night wore on, the cabin seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its shadows growing more restless and its presence more malevolent. The group's unity and resolve would be tested as they faced the horrifying truth of the cabin's past and the looming threat of the spirit's vengeful wrath. Rachel, shaken but resolute, looked to her friends. We have to confront this. We have to end it before it's too late. The cabin, with its dark history and haunting presence, had become a battleground for their sanity and survival. The night ahead promised to be one of confrontation and horror as the group faced the darkness that had claimed so many before them.